Okay, so let me run through this. I want to thank Shiro for the issues paper that he shared, and also for this ambitious agenda he's got for creating a Asia-Pacific digital economy governance regime. I'm a bit nervous that we're spending a lot of our time looking backwards to solve the current challenge and the future trade environment when it comes to both the data policy issues that Yiping raised and focused on quite correctly, I think, and the current environment, the future trade opportunities that we have. We are talking, when we talk about digital governance, of course, of the rules of the road, and it's not clear to me that we're identifying the problems that need to be addressed. I have, Shiro's going to get nervous about some 20-odd slides to cover in 7 minutes, but I really only have 3 points that I want to make, and then propose, if not a governance framework, then the necessary elements for developing one, I think. Trying to look forward. So I assume you all now know what this is, Beeple's $69 million token. Digital non-fungible token, depending on who you listen to. Non-fungible tokens are the next key fluid enabler of the digital economy. They solve the IP problem. They are Bitcoin for the art world, or a piece of hype-driven puffery, or digitalization that will accelerate and amplify all manner of fraud and piracy problems that we have right now because we can't track and trace what we need to in terms of owners. Anyone can claim this. And what we're going to see right now is what we've seen with cryptocurrencies and Bitcoins and cloud. We're going to see a rush to regulate, with all of our jurisdictions trying to bring in the next regulation to control this because they're worried. And this is where we're seeing the fragmentation that's been happening for nigh on 20 years when it comes to digital, which was originally at the bottom technical layer and is now at that governance layer that Shiro is worried about. Or is it that big? Or as others are shrugging, is this just the next step in pretty much everything being digitized? And as the New York Times would call out, maybe this is just the equivalent of baseball cards that were found in bubblegum packets. And maybe we don't need to rush to worry about the digitization and the digitalization regulation because the rules of the road are going to show us what's happening. And remember with that statement that anything that can be digitized will be digitized. That's the path that we're on at the moment. As Deborah pointed out, we're talking about the economy, the government oversight. When we look at this, we see everything getting digitized: sex, romance, rom-coms. So we've got some problems that we have to address, or do we? What problem is it? For years, literally years, Josh has been warning the world of the constraints of cross-border data flows that we're going to threaten to derail or cause a dip in the take-up of cross-border data flows. Deborah's been warning of the digital trade agreements going wrong and that we needed to enhance this, particularly for the benefits of SMEs. And yet, while we've been telling this story to governments, digital is booming. Digital is the success story. Digital was booming before the pandemic. It's been the success story of the pandemic. Everyone's gone digital. In 6 months, we saw the leap ahead of some 5 to 10 years, depending on economy or sector. We've seen that huge leap and advance caused by it. And we're watching governments look at this and say, well, hold on, you warned us. But at the same time that we're seeing this huge growth in digital economies, domestic economies, digital take-up and digital consumption within our jurisdictions, we're seeing an even greater race to regulate and a greater number of regulations coming up, as Josh has once again highlighted. So the problem is that at the same time as we're seeing this rush to regulate, we're seeing the dominance, the digital platforms we're worried about, increasingly get bigger. Again, Josh just flagged the size of the 5 biggest US companies on the S&P. Ambassador Bilahari flagged the issues in China with the Chinese authorities getting overly concerned with Alibaba and wanting to flag competitive policy and competition problems. And we worry that these are too big to fail and they're determining domestic policy. And yet the narrative sounds strange because at the same time, We're seeing national digital champions equally grow as fast as this. The payments issue and the digital transaction space that both Deborah and Josh flagged has seen massive growth, and we're watching huge amounts of innovation and success both at the national level and the sub-national level, with new players emerging to solve both the enterprise and the retail space. So that for all that we've been threatening for the last 5, 7, 10 years, the governments that didn't reform on the digital agenda would see threats to their digital economy take-up. The story appears to be somewhat different to that. And for all that we worried that the dominants were somehow going to become too big to fail, snap up and swallow the up-and-comers, drown out innovation, we're seeing a flood of innovation. So what exactly is it that we're trying to solve with a digital economy governance regime? Have we actually got clear on what this would address for us? Which problem? Which challenge? We have so many challenges when it comes to digital, and you'll see as we drown out this slide, we couldn't even fit in non-fungible tokens on there as we rush to regulate this massive issues. But as we know, when it comes to policy and regulation, these are all going to require compromise and trade-offs. The fact that we have issues around trust, around privacy, around security. Privacy isn't dead because we're in a digital world. In fact, there's a lot suggesting that privacy will get enhanced. Reasonable security, which is all that we could ever expect, isn't out the window because of the digital environment. Indeed, our ability to track and coordinate on security processes, we go back to that digital transaction space. We worry about source of funds, and yet right now we can enable real-time payment access across our countries, across our jurisdictions and economies, and we can track and trace without needing to enforce data localization requirements. But then we have the issue that we really appear to be up against, which is the digital regulatory arbitrage, which we see emerging on two fronts. Firstly, we see businesses shopping for the best possible position, and the best possible position is driven by compliance at this point in time, with companies looking to go to jurisdictions and put in place to protect their own compliance the most onerous restrictions. Now, we've seen that story for a long time now. That now is getting compounded with economies rushing to take competitive advantage of digital regulatory enactment. And because of this attempt to impose extraterritoriality to assert their competitive advantage, we see this digital trade-off of who is asserting the most specific and the most all-encompassing rules. But this final slide is really where I want to linger. What then do we actually need to do to address those challenges to take forth a digital economy governance framework? And I'll suggest that there's 5 things that we need to put in place if we're to achieve this. The first is a recognition of data. Data is not good or service. It can be both, it can be neither. It is non-depreciable, it can be used at the same time in multiple locations for different exercises. We need to start developing a trade in data framework if we're to achieve a governance regime. Secondly, we need to develop an understanding of the digital value chain. We've done this in trade for a long time now. We've yet to do this in digital trade. And then we need to get much clearer on the role play of participants in the digital trade framework, the producers, the processors, the value-add contributors, and the consumers. We've done this previously. Different participants will play at different roles across the value chain, and they will be the same participant in many cases. We can set the rules for how they participate. 4, we then need at that point to look at the role of regulation, not before, and that's our primary problem right now. Jurisdictional regulation to reinforce the beneficial rules of the road, which we will already see happening between our various jurisdictions. And 5th, and most crucially, we need the measurements for digital to begin to track what is working and what isn't working. And right now, we don't have that. That will be where the challenges will come for us. Right now, we all know the flaws with GDP, but at least in GDP, we have aspirational targets that economies reach for to show economic growth. And that probably is what we will need to start developing to be effective when it comes to digital trade. Bureau. I've gone through that very quickly. I'm going to stop there.